a small, peaceful town surrounded by lush green hills and dense forests, there lived a woman named Clara Hayes. Clara wasn't someone who stood out in a crowd. She was the kind of person you might pass on the street without giving a second glance. Her life was simple, predictable, and quiet. Every morning she woke up early, brewed herself a cup of tea, and headed to her job as an accountant at a local firm. Her days were filled with numbers, spreadsheets, and the rhythmic tapping of keys on her keyboard. When evening came, she would return home to tend to her garden or curl up with a good book by the fireplace. To her neighbors, Clara was just another face in the community, a polite, reserved woman who kept to herself. But what most people didn't know about Clara was that beneath her calm exterior lay a hidden talent, one she rarely spoke about. Growing up on a farm tucked away in the countryside, Clara had learned skills that few in her current life could imagine. Her father, a man of few words but immense patience, had taught her everything he knew about handling firearms. It wasn't just about shooting. It was about discipline, focus, and understanding the mechanics of both the weapon and the environment around her. For Clara, those lessons had been more than just practical. They had shaped her character. They instilled in her a sense of precision and determination that stayed with her long after she left the farm. As time passed, Clara's life took her far from the wide-open fields where she once practiced with her father. She moved to the town, started her career, and built a routine that revolved around work and solitude. The rifle she once used so skillfully gathered dust in a corner of her brother's garage, a relic of her past that she hadn't thought about in years. That is, until one fateful Saturday morning, when something unexpected happened. Clara loved visiting the farmer's market every weekend. It was one of the few social activities she allowed herself, a chance to soak in the lively atmosphere and pick up fresh produce for the week. The market was always bustling with activity, vendors calling out their prices, children laughing as they chased each other between stalls, and the aroma of freshly baked bread wafting through the air. Clara enjoyed these moments of connection, even if she remained on the sidelines observing rather than participating. On this particular morning, as Clara browsed through a stall selling homemade jams, she overheard a conversation between two men standing nearby. One of them was talking excitedly about a local shooting range hosting a competition later that day. From what Clara could gather, it was open to anyone willing to participate, and there were cash prizes for the winners. The idea struck a chord deep within her. Memories of her childhood flooded back. The cool weight of the rifle in her hands, the sharp crack of the shot, and the satisfaction of hitting the bullseye. It had been years since she last held a gun, but the thought of stepping back onto a range sent a thrill through her veins. At first, Clara dismissed the idea as silly. What business did she have entering a competition? These events were usually dominated by experienced shooters, men and women who spent hours honing their craft and bragging about their trophies. She was just a regular woman with a desk job and a quiet life. But the more she thought about it, the more intrigued she became. Maybe it wouldn't hurt to try just once. After all, what did she have to lose? With a mix of excitement and nervousness bubbling inside her, Clara decided to sign up. She called her brother later that afternoon and asked if she could borrow his old rifle. He chuckled on the phone, clearly surprised by her request. "You serious, Clara?" he asked. "It's been ages since you've touched a gun." But when she explained her plan, he agreed, adding with a teasing tone, "Just don't embarrass me out there." The next few hours were a blur of preparation. Clara dug out her sturdy boots and a flannel shirt from the back of her closet. She packed a small bag with essentials, water, snacks, and a notebook to jot down any observations during the competition. As she drove toward the shooting range, her mind raced with questions. Would she remember how to hold the rifle properly? Could she still hit the target with the same accuracy she once had? And most importantly, how would the other competitors react to seeing her, a seemingly ordinary woman, walking into their world? When Clara arrived at the range, the scene before her was nothing like the serene countryside she remembered from her youth. The area was alive with energy, buzzing with participants and spectators alike. Men and women in tactical gear milled about, comparing equipment and sharing stories of past victories. Targets were set up at various distances, some so far away, they looked like tiny dots against the horizon. The smell of gunpowder lingered in the air, mingling with the sound of distant shots ringing out. Clara parked her car and stepped out, feeling a pang of self-consciousness as she slung the rifle case over her shoulder. She knew she didn't look like the typical competitor. While others wore sleek uniforms adorned with patches and logos, she stuck out in her plain clothes. Still, she reminded herself why she was here. To reconnect with a part of her past and maybe, just maybe, prove something to herself. As she made her way to the registration table, she couldn't help but notice the curious glances thrown her way. Some were indifferent while others carried a hint of skepticism. One man in particular caught her eye. He was older, with grizzled features and arms crossed firmly over his chest. His gaze lingered on her for a moment too long before he turned to a friend and said, loud enough for everyone nearby to hear, "Ma'am, maybe you should step aside. This isn't your scene." His words stung, but Clara forced herself to smile and nod politely. She didn't argue or defend herself. Instead, she focused on the task ahead, determined to let her actions speak louder than any retort. Little did anyone know, this quiet woman from the outskirts of town was about to make waves in ways no one could have anticipated. The shooting range was alive with energy, a stark contrast to the quiet life Clara was accustomed to. The air buzzed with anticipation as competitors checked their gear, adjusted their scopes, and exchanged confident banter. Some were stretching, their arms or pacing back and forth, psyching themselves up for the challenge ahead. Others stood in small clusters, boasting about past victories or debating strategies for the day's competition. It was clear that many of them had been here before, seasoned shooters who knew the drill and thrived on the adrenaline rush of competition. Clara, on the other hand, felt like an outsider looking in. She lingered near the edge of the crowd, trying to blend into the background while she waited for her turn to register. Her presence didn't go unnoticed. As she approached the registration table, handing over her form and receiving her participant badge, she could feel eyes on her. Whispers rippled through the group, and though she couldn't make out every word, she caught fragments. "Who's that? Is she really competing? Doesn't look like she belongs here." Her stomach tightened, but she reminded herself why she had come. This wasn't about proving anything to these people. It was about reconnecting with a part of herself she had long neglected. Still, the weight of their judgment pressed down on her shoulders. She glanced around, taking in the sea of tactical gear, high-tech rifles, and polished boots. Everyone seemed so prepared, so confident. By comparison, Clara looked almost comical in her jeans and flannel shirt, her rifle case battered and worn from years of disuse. After registering, Clara found a spot at one of the stations to set up. She opened the case carefully, revealing the old rifle inside. The wood grip was scratched and the metal barrel bore faint traces of rust, but it was familiar, a relic from her childhood that still held sentimental value. She ran her fingers along its surface, feeling a surge of nostalgia. This wasn't just a tool. It was a connection to her father and the lessons he had taught her. Precision, patience, discipline. Those words echoed in her mind as she methodically assembled her equipment, checking each piece with meticulous care. As she worked, she became aware of someone standing nearby. Turning her head slightly, she saw the same grizzled man who had spoken earlier, the one who told her to step aside. He was leaning against a post, arms crossed, watching her with a mixture of amusement and disbelief. His expression said it all. He thought this was a joke, a waste of time. When their eyes met briefly, he smirked and shook his head, muttering something under his breath to the person beside him. Clara forced herself not to react. She tightened her grip on the rifle and focused on the task at hand. The competition began with a series of basic rounds designed to warm up the participants. Targets were placed at varying distances, starting relatively close and gradually moving farther away. One by one, the shooters stepped up to take their shots. The sound of gunfire filled the air, punctuated by cheers or groans depending on the results. Spectators gathered around, commenting on each performance. Some competitors strutted back to their stations after impressive displays, basking in the applause. Others slunk away quietly, visibly frustrated by missed opportunities. When it was Clara's turn, the atmosphere shifted. There was an almost palpable curiosity in the air, a mix of skepticism and morbid fascination. People wanted to see what this unassuming woman would do. Would she freeze under pressure? Would she even hit the target? A few snickers broke out as she stepped forward, adjusting her stance and raising the rifle to her shoulder. For a moment, everything else faded away. The noise of the crowd, the skeptical stares, the doubts, they all disappeared. All that mattered was the target in front of her and the steady rhythm of her breathing. Clara took her time, aligning the sights with precision. She remembered her father's voice in her ear, calm and steady, guiding her movements. Breathe. In. Hold it. Now squeeze. Her finger curled around the trigger, and with a sharp crack, the bullet left the barrel. Time seemed to slow as everyone turned to look at the target. Gasps rippled through the crowd when they saw the result. Dead center. Perfectly centered. No wavering, no hesitation, just pure accuracy. But Clara didn't stop there. Round after round, she repeated the process, each shot hitting its mark with uncanny precision. The murmurs grew louder as spectators realized this wasn't a fluke. This wasn't luck. This woman, who moments ago had been dismissed as out of place, was proving to be a force to be reckoned with. Even the judges paused to watch, their clipboards momentarily forgotten as they exchanged astonished glances. By the end of the preliminary rounds, Clara had scored perfectly, leaving the crowd stunned and more than a little unsettled. The grizzled man who had mocked her earlier now wore a frown, his arms still crossed but his confidence visibly shaken. Other competitors stole glances at her station, some with admiration, others with thinly veiled frustration. How could someone who looked so ordinary perform so extraordinarily? For Clara, the experience was surreal. She hadn't expected to draw this much attention, nor had she anticipated performing so well. Each successful shot bolstered her confidence, pushing her to focus even harder. Yet, despite the growing tension around her, she remained calm and composed. She wasn't here to compete with anyone else. She was here to honor the skills her father had taught her, and to remind herself of what she was capable of. As the preliminary rounds drew to a close, the organizers announced that the final challenge would test the true limits of the competitors' abilities. The target would be placed at an unprecedented distance, one that most seasoned shooters struggled to hit consistently. Many in the crowd muttered among themselves, speculating which of the top contenders might succeed. Clara listened quietly, her heart pounding with a mix of excitement and nerves. This was the moment of truth. Could she rise to the occasion once again, or would the pressure finally get to her? The stage was set, and Clara knew there was no turning back now. Whatever happened next, she had already proven something to herself, and perhaps to a few others as well. The days following Clara's extraordinary performance at the shooting range felt like a whirlwind. What had started as a quiet, personal decision to step out of her comfort zone quickly spiraled into something far bigger than she could have imagined. News of her record-breaking shot spread rapidly, not just within the small town but across neighboring cities and even online. Local newspapers ran headlines calling her the quiet sharpshooter, while social media platforms lit up with videos of her final shot, the one that blew apart the scoring monitor. People couldn't get enough of the story, a seemingly ordinary woman who walked into a competition full of seasoned professionals and left as an unexpected champion. At first, Clara was overwhelmed by the attention. Reporters called her incessantly, hoping to schedule interviews. Camera crews showed up unannounced at her doorstep, eager to capture footage of the woman behind the legendary shot. Sponsors reached out with offers of endorsement deals, promising everything from free gear to lucrative contracts if she agreed to promote their brands. Shooting clubs from around the country invited her to elite tournaments, assuring her that her skills would be welcomed and celebrated on larger stages. But despite the flood of opportunities, Clara remained steadfast in her decision to stay, grounded. She politely declined most of the offers, explaining that her participation in the competition hadn't been about fame or money. For her, it was a deeply personal journey, a chance to reconnect with a part of her past and honor the lessons her father had taught her. The last thing she wanted was to turn her newfound recognition into a career or let it overshadow the values that had guided her throughout her life. Instead, Clara chose to focus on what mattered most to her. She returned to her quiet routine, resuming her work as an accountant and spending evenings tending to her garden or reading by the fireplace. To anyone watching from the outside, it might have seemed like nothing had changed. But those closest to her noticed subtle shifts in her demeanor. There was a new confidence in the way she carried herself, a quiet assurance that came from knowing she had faced doubt and adversity head-on and emerged victorious. One of the most significant changes in Clara's life was the role she began to play in her community. Inspired by her story, young women in the town started approaching her, asking for advice or guidance on marksmanship. At first, Clara hesitated. She didn't see herself as a teacher or mentor, let alone someone worthy of admiration. But as more people reached out, she realized she had an opportunity to make a difference, to share not only her technical skills, but also the mindset that had driven her success. Clara decided to host informal sessions at the local shooting range, inviting anyone interested to join her on weekends. These gatherings weren't just about teaching how to shoot. They were about instilling a sense of discipline, patience, and self-belief. Clara emphasized the importance of preparation and focus, encouraging her students to trust in their abilities, rather than second-guess themselves. She often shared stories from her own experiences, including the challenges she faced during the competition and how she overcame them. Her humility and authenticity resonated deeply with her audience, many of whom saw her as a role model. Among her students was a teenage girl named Emily, whose enthusiasm reminded Clara of her younger self. Emily had always been fascinated by firearms but lacked the confidence to pursue her interests seriously. Under Clara's guidance, she blossomed, developing not only her shooting skills but also a newfound sense of empowerment. One day, after hitting a particularly difficult target, Emily turned to Clara with tears in her eyes. "You made me believe I could do this," she said. "Thank you." Moments like these reaffirmed Clara's decision to use her platform for good. While she never sought the spotlight, she understood that her actions had inspired others to push beyond their limits. Her story became a symbol of resilience, a reminder that greatness often lies where no one expects to find it. As time passed, Clara's influence extended beyond her immediate circle. Schools and community organizations invited her to speak about perseverance and self-confidence. Though public speaking wasn't something she naturally enjoyed, she accepted these invitations, knowing they offered an opportunity to reach a wider audience. Her speeches were simple yet powerful, filled with anecdotes from her childhood and the lessons she had learned along the way. She encouraged listeners to embrace their unique talents and not be afraid to stand out, even when faced with skepticism or ridicule. Despite her growing reputation, Clara continued to live modestly. She resisted the temptation to capitalize on her fame, turning down lucrative offers that conflicted with her values. Instead, she channeled her energy into giving back to her community, whether through mentoring young shooters or volunteering at local events. Her generosity earned her widespread respect, solidifying her status as a beloved figure in the town. Even the grizzled man who had once mocked her became a regular presence at the shooting range, often seeking Clara's advice on improving his technique. Their interactions evolved from awkward exchanges to genuine camaraderie, built on mutual respect and admiration. It was a testament to how much Clara's quiet strength had impacted those around her, not through grand gestures, but through consistent kindness and humility. By the end of the year, Clara's name had become synonymous with excellence and determination. Yet she remained unchanged at her core, a simple woman who valued hard work, integrity, and the power of believing in oneself. Her journey served as a beacon of hope for countless individuals, reminding them that true strength comes not from external validation, but from staying true to who you are. And though she never intended to become a legend, there was no denying that Clara Hayes had left an indelible mark on everyone fortunate enough to cross her path. Years passed, and life in the small town returned to its usual rhythm. The excitement surrounding Clara Hayes' record-breaking shot eventually faded from the headlines, replaced by newer stories and events. But for those who had witnessed her performance or been touched by her actions afterward, the memory of that day lingered like a quiet flame, burning steadily in their hearts. Clara herself slipped back into her routine with ease, content to live a life of simplicity and purpose. To outsiders, it might have seemed as though nothing had changed. She still worked as an accountant, tended her garden, and spent evenings curled up with a book. Yet beneath the surface, her life had taken on new dimensions, ones that rippled outward, quietly shaping the lives of others. Clara's weekends became sacred moments dedicated to mentoring young women interested in marksmanship. At first, these sessions were informal gatherings at the local shooting range, where she shared tips on technique and encouraged her students to focus on precision and patience. Over time, however, they grew into something far more meaningful. What began as lessons in shooting evolved into conversations about confidence, resilience, and self-worth. Clara often reminded her students that the skills they learned on the range weren't just about hitting targets. They were tools for navigating life itself. "You can't control everything," she would say, standing beside a nervous beginner struggling to steady her aim. "The wind will change, distractions will come, and sometimes things won't go your way. But what you can control is how you respond. Stay calm, stay focused, and trust yourself." Her words carried weight because they came from experience. Many of her students knew bits and pieces of her story: the grizzled man who told her to step aside, the flawless shot that broke the scoring monitor. But hearing Clara recount it firsthand added depth to its impact. She spoke openly about the doubts she faced, not just from others but also within herself. She admitted feeling out of place among seasoned competitors, unsure if she belonged. But she emphasized that fear wasn't a reason to give up. It was a challenge to overcome. One of Clara's most devoted students was Emily, the teenage girl whose confidence blossomed under her guidance. By the time Emily graduated high school, she had become a skilled shooter in her own right, winning several local competitions and earning scholarships to pursue further training. On the day she received her acceptance letter to a prestigious academy, Emily drove straight to Clara's house, tears streaming down her face. "I couldn't have done this without you," she said, hugging Clara tightly. "You didn't just teach me how to shoot. You taught me how to believe in myself." Moments like these filled Clara with a deep sense of fulfillment. Though she never sought recognition or reward, knowing that she had made a difference in someone's life brought her immense joy. Her influence extended beyond the shooting range, too. Parents of her students often approached her, thanking her for instilling values of discipline and perseverance in their children. Teachers reported seeing improvements in classroom behavior and academic performance among kids who participated in her sessions. Even the grizzled man who once doubted her became a vocal advocate for her program, encouraging his own daughters to join. As word of Clara's mentorship spread, invitations poured in from schools, community centers, and organizations across the region. They wanted her to speak at graduations, workshops, and motivational events. While public speaking wasn't something she naturally enjoyed, Clara accepted these requests, viewing them as opportunities to reach a wider audience. Her speeches were simple yet powerful, filled with stories from her childhood and lessons she had learned along the way. She avoided grandiose language or flashy anecdotes, instead focusing on universal truths: the importance of hard work, the value of humility, and the strength found in staying true to oneself. "I'm not special," she would tell her audiences, her voice warm and steady. "I'm just someone who refused to let other people's opinions define me. You don't need to be extraordinary to achieve great things. Sometimes, all it takes is showing up, doing your best, and believing in yourself, even when no one else does." Her message resonated deeply, particularly with young women who saw themselves in her story. Girls who had grown up thinking they weren't strong enough, smart enough, or capable enough found inspiration in Clara's journey. She became a symbol of quiet strength, a reminder that greatness often hides in plain sight, waiting for the right moment to shine. Despite her growing influence, Clara remained fiercely committed to living a humble life. She resisted the temptation to monetize her fame, turning down lucrative offers to professionalize or endorse products. Instead, she poured her energy into giving back to her community. When a local charity needed help organizing a fundraiser, Clara volunteered without hesitation. When a neighbor fell ill and struggled to maintain their farm, she pitched in, lending her hands and resources without expecting anything in return. Her generosity earned her widespread admiration, solidifying her status as a pillar of the town. Even the grizzled man who had once mocked her became a close friend over time. Their relationship transformed from awkward camaraderie to genuine mutual respect. He often joined Clara at the range, seeking advice on improving his technique while sharing stories of his own struggles and triumphs. Together, they formed an unlikely bond, united by their shared love of marksmanship and their appreciation for the lessons Clara embodied. By the time Clara reached her 60s, her legacy was firmly etched into the fabric of the community. A plaque honoring her achievements hung proudly at the shooting range, commemorating her record-breaking shot and her contributions to mentoring young shooters. Local schools named scholarships after her, ensuring that future generations would benefit from her example. And though she never sought such recognition, Clara accepted it graciously, using every opportunity to remind others that true success isn't measured by accolades. It's measured by the positive impact you leave behind. In her later years, Clara slowed down physically but remained active in spirit. She continued mentoring, though on a smaller scale, hosting intimate sessions for a handful of students at a time. These gatherings felt less like formal lessons and more like family reunions, filled with laughter, storytelling, and heartfelt encouragement. Her home became a gathering place for former students, many of whom returned to visit and share updates on their lives. Some had pursued careers in law enforcement or the military. Others had become teachers, doctors, or entrepreneurs. Regardless of their paths, they all carried a piece of Clara with them, a quiet strength and unwavering belief in their potential. On a crisp autumn afternoon, as golden leaves swirled in the breeze, Clara stood at the edge of the shooting range, watching a group of teenagers practice their aim. Among them was Emily, now a confident young woman leading a new generation of shooters. As Emily turned to thank Clara for her guidance, the older woman smiled softly, her eyes reflecting pride and gratitude. "I didn't do anything special," Clara said, shaking her head. "All I did was remind you of what you already knew, that you're stronger than you think." Her words lingered in the air long after she walked away, carried on the wind like seeds destined to take root elsewhere. Clara Hayes may have lived a quiet life, but her legacy was anything but silent. Through her actions, she had proven that even the simplest acts of courage and kindness could create ripples that stretched far beyond what anyone could imagine. And in doing so, she had shown the world that true greatness lies not in seeking attention but in lifting others up and leaving the world a little brighter than you found it. The final challenge was unlike anything Clara had ever faced. The organizers had pushed the boundaries of difficulty, placing the target at a distance that seemed almost impossible to hit. It wasn't just far away. It was so distant that even spotting it required squinting hard against the sunlight. To make matters worse, the wind picked up unexpectedly, sending swirls of dust across the range and creating unpredictable gusts that could easily throw off even the most experienced shooters. For many competitors, this was a moment of reckoning, a test not only of skill but also of mental fortitude. As the finalists lined up for their turns, the tension in the air was palpable. Spectators huddled closer, whispering excitedly as they speculated who would emerge victorious. Each shooter approached the line with determination etched on their face, their movements deliberate and calculated. Some adjusted their scopes repeatedly, trying to account for the wind speed and distance. Others muttered under their breath, psyching themselves up for the shot of a lifetime. One by one they fired, and more often than not, their bullets missed entirely or grazed the edges of the target. Frustration rippled through the crowd as the scoreboard remained disappointingly low. When it was Clara's turn, the entire range fell silent. All eyes were on her, some curious, others skeptical, and a few downright hostile. The grizzled man who had mocked her earlier stood nearby, arms still crossed, his expression unreadable. A few people whispered behind their hands, no doubt wondering if she'd finally meet her match. After all, how could someone who looked so ordinary succeed where seasoned professionals were failing? Clara stepped forward without hesitation. She blocked out the noise around her, focusing solely on the task at hand. Her heart raced, but she forced herself to breathe deeply, just as her father had taught her years ago. "Calm is your ally," he used to say. "Let your mind guide your hands." She repeated those words silently, over and over, until her nerves settled into a steady rhythm. Then, she raised the rifle to her shoulder, feeling its familiar weight against her body. Positioning herself carefully, Clara took stock of the conditions. The wind was tricky, shifting direction every few seconds, but she had learned long ago how to read such patterns. She studied the movement of leaves on nearby trees and the way the dust swirled, gauging the strength and direction of each gust. Adjusting her aim slightly, she compensated for both the wind and the immense distance to the target. Her finger hovered over the trigger, poised but patient. She didn't rush. Instead, she waited for the perfect moment when the wind died down just enough to give her a clear path. Time seemed to stretch endlessly as Clara held her position, unmoving. The crowd grew restless, some shifting uncomfortably, while others exchanged puzzled glances. They weren't used to seeing someone take so much time before firing. Most competitors fired quickly, relying on instinct and muscle memory. But Clara was different. She operated with precision, treating every shot as a puzzle, to be solved rather than a reflex to be acted upon. Finally, the moment came. The wind paused briefly, offering a fleeting window of opportunity. Clara exhaled slowly, steadying her aim one last time. And then, with a sharp crack, she pulled the trigger. The sound echoed across the range, sharp and sudden, cutting through, the silence like a knife. Everyone froze, holding their breath as they turned to look at the target. At first, nothing happened. The monitors tracking the scores flickered uncertainly, unable to process what had just occurred. Then, with a loud pop, the screen displaying the results malfunctioned entirely, sparks flying as it shorted out. Gasps erupted from the crowd, followed by murmurs of disbelief. What had just happened? Was it possible that Clara's shot had been so perfect that the system couldn't handle it? A judge hurried over to inspect the target manually. He peered through binoculars, his jaw dropping as he confirmed the result. Shaking his head in amazement, he turned to address the crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, his voice trembling with awe, "this participant has achieved a direct hit. Dead center. Flawless." The announcement sent shockwaves through the range. People erupted into cheers, clapping and whistling as they stared at Clara in disbelief. Even the grizzled man who had mocked her earlier looked stunned, his usual bravado replaced by genuine respect. Cameras flashed as spectators scrambled to capture the moment, while others simply gawked, unable to comprehend what they had just witnessed. For Clara, the reaction was overwhelming but strangely distant. She lowered the rifle slowly, her hands steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. Part of her wanted to celebrate, to bask in the applause and revel in her triumph. But another part, the quieter, more introspective side, remained, focused on the bigger picture. This wasn't about winning or proving anyone wrong. It was about honoring the skills her father had taught her and reminding herself of the strength she carried within. As the judges worked to repair the damaged scoring system, Clara stepped back from the line, retreating to the sidelines where she could catch her breath. Competitors approached her cautiously, some offering congratulations, others asking questions about her technique. She answered politely but kept her responses brief, preferring to observe rather than engage. The attention made her uncomfortable, not because she disliked recognition, but because she didn't want to lose sight of why she was here in the first place. Meanwhile, the buzz surrounding her performance continued to grow. Word spread quickly among the spectators, many of whom began recounting the story to friends and family. "Did you see that woman? She blew apart the monitor. Who is she?" Questions flew back and forth as the legend of Clara Hayes began to take shape. By the time the competition officially ended, her name was on everyone's lips. Despite the chaos swirling around her, Clara stayed grounded. She packed up her equipment quietly, careful not to draw too much attention to herself. As she prepared to leave, the grizzled man approached her once again. This time, however, his demeanor was completely different. Gone was the smug smirk. In its place was an expression of humility and admiration. Removing his hat, he extended a hand toward Clara. "I owe you an apology," he said, his voice sincere. "I underestimated you and I was wrong. That shot, well, let's just say I've never seen anything like it." Clara accepted his handshake with a small smile, her gaze warm but unwavering. "We all have something to prove," she replied softly, "but sometimes it's not about proving it to others, it's about proving it to ourselves." Her words lingered in the air long after she walked away, leaving a lasting impression on everyone who heard them. Clara Hayes might have entered the competition as an unknown figure, but she left as a symbol of quiet strength and resilience. Her flawless shot hadn't just broken records, it had shattered preconceptions, inspiring those around her to rethink what was possible. And though she returned to her quiet life soon afterward, the impact of her actions rippled far beyond the confines of the shooting range.